If you ever wonder how crypto actually goes mainstream, this episode explains why a $200 million deal between an Ethereum giant and MrBeast might be the blueprint. So no, this episode isn't really about MrBeast, and it's not really about Ethereum either. It's about how the next phase of crypto adoption won't feel like crypto at all. It feels like normal, invisible, and quietly embedded into things people already love. In this episode, I will break down why an Ethereum treasury company is investing in MrBeast, what that means for long-term ETH, and how to think about crypto news through distribution and culture, not just tech. Let me start with something that at first sounded completely ridiculous. When I first saw this story, my immediate reaction was like, wait, what? Why would BitMine Immersion Technologies, a company focused on building an Ethereum treasury strategy, care about MrBeast? What does Ethereum, a blockchain, financial infrastructure, and code have to do with viral videos, with massive giveaways, with consumer brands like Feastables, selling chocolate bars in real stores to real people? And more importantly, why would serious capital influenced by thinkers like Tom Lee even look in that direction? Because once you slow this down and really examine it, you realize this isn't about YouTube at all. This is a great example where crypto adoption actually comes from. It's not about personalities, it's not about influencers, and it's definitely not about hype. This story is about something much deeper. It's about where crypto adoption actually comes from, and most people, even people who've been in the crypto for years, completely misunderstand that. As always, before we go any further, quick disclaimer. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing in this episode should be considered financial, investment, or legal advice. Everything I'm discussing here is based on public information and reporting. Always do your own research and consult a qualified professional before making any financial decisions. All right, let's continue. Now, you might be thinking, why should I even care about this? Maybe you don't own crypto, maybe you never use Ethereum, maybe you think NFTs were a complete joke. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you. But this story matters even if you never touch crypto, because it sits right at the intersection of four things that shape the modern world: money, technology, culture, and how adoption actually happens. The reality is that most people believe markets move because of better technology, better code, better features, faster systems. But history tells us something very different. Markets move when technology meets distribution. In other words, when something useful gets placed in front of people who actually trust the system delivering it. And that's the key idea I want you to keep in mind as we go through this episode, because once you see that, a lot of crypto narratives suddenly stop making sense, and a few quiet strategies start making a lot of sense. Let's see the clear foundations. Let's slow everything down and make sure we are on solid ground here. First, let's talk about Ethereum. As you know, Ethereum is a blockchain. Everybody knows that. But that word gets thrown around so much that it barely means anything anymore. So here's a simpler way to think about it. Ethereum is like a global computer that anyone can use. Not owned by a company, not controlled by a government, just software running across thousands of machines around the world. People use it to move value, create digital ownership, build financial applications without traditional banks. Now, when you hear the phrase Ethereum treasury strategy, it sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It simply means a company decides to hold Ethereum as long-term strategy asset, Treat it as an infrastructure, not a trade, and believe it will be useful, not just valuable. This isn't new. Companies do this all the time. Some hold oil, some hold data centers, some hold logistic networks, some hold intellectual property. This is the same idea, just applied to digital infrastructure. And now, here's where things start to get interesting. Let's talk about the people involved, not as celebrities, but as characters in a system. First, Tom Lee has been around Wall Street for a long time. He's not known for hype, he's known for macro thinking. In other words, the big picture, long cycles, incentives, and one thing he's been consistent about for years is this idea that crypto only wins if it becomes useful, not just tradable, and I have to agree with him. Then there's the BitMine Immersion Technologies. This is a company that started in crypto infrastructure and began rethinking what a balance sheet should look like in a digital world. Less short-term thinking, more long-term positioning, more infrastructure mindset. And then there's MrBeast. And this is where most people completely lose the plot. MrBeast is not a YouTuber. He's a global media company, a consumer brand machine, a trust engine. He reaches hundreds of millions of people who don't care about crypto at all. And that's precisely the point. This is not finance meeting entertainment. This is infrastructure meeting distribution. Now, let's talk about timing, because timing tells you intent. This strategy started surfacing around the 2024 and 2025 period. And that matters. And let me tell you why. Because this came after the NFT hype, the multiple crypto crashes, the regulatory pressure, the institutional skepticism. This was not a bull market stunt. This was not everything is pumping, let's get crazy here. This was a post-hype decision, which tells you something very important. This wasn't about excitement, it was about positioning. Here is the logic, in my opinion, most people miss. Ethereum already has developers, capital, institutions, and financial tools. So what it doesn't have is deep cultural integration. And guess what? MrBeast already has trust, reach, young audiences, real consumer behavior. So let's think about Amazon for a second. Amazon didn't win because it had better technology than everyone else. It won because it solved distribution and trust. This strategy is not saying, let's pump Ethereum. It's saying if Ethereum becomes invisible infrastructure behind things people already love, it wins. That's completely different bet. So let me be clear here. This doesn't mean Ethereum goes up tomorrow, prices react instantly, adoption is guaranteed. What it affects is long-term demand dynamics. In other words, people touching Ethereum rails without knowing it. Ethereum being used as utility, not the speculation. This means less reliance on hype cycles because long-term value comes from something very boring, repeated, invisible, and normal use. That's how real infrastructure wins. Now, let's be honest here. This could fail. As you know, culture is unpredictable. Attention shifts fast. Regulation matters. Infrastructure can stay invisible forever. Just because distribution exists doesn't mean adoption follows. Anyone ignoring those risks isn't thinking clearly. This signals a shift for the future, away from what coin will pump toward what infrastructure quietly integrates into daily life. Crypto futures might look boring, and that's exactly why it might actually work. Here are my practical takeaways. When you see crypto news, ask yourself, who controls distribution? Who controls users? Who controls trust? Technology alone doesn't win. Technology plus culture does. So no, this episode isn't really about MrBeast, and it's not really about Ethereum either. It's about this idea. The next phase of crypto adoption won't feel like crypto at all. It will feel normal, invisible, and quietly embedded into things people already love. That's where real change happened. Don't forget to subscribe, and until the next one.